So Dixie asks, how do we use our bodies when we're in heaven? Are they ethereal? Are we orbs of light? What happens when we cross over? What's our experience going to be like? Well, this is an excellent question. And it's a question I think that stems from a couple different things. One is the way that we perceive our physical reality where we are now. And the other is reports we get back from people who've had near death experiences. So when people have a near death experience, some do report that they were basically orbs of light and they saw light beings, and they report that they didn't have a body. Others report that they were in a very physical environment, that they had bodies, that it was actually, quote, realer than real. The colors were more vibrant. There were sounds that they couldn't describe. There were, everything was just incredibly more real than it is here. So how could it be both? How could it be that some people report being orbs and some people report a very physical experience? So, which is it? Well, I think when we think about the afterlife, or where we go when our body cease to function, we really have to expand our minds. So let's start with the universe that we live in now. We think of the universe we live in now, we think about, like, for example, the earth that we live on. How many different environments are there on earth? How many different types of things can you experience? More than most of us can imagine. And imagine the earth is just a drop in the ocean when it comes to the number of planets in our galaxies and the number of galaxies in our universe. It's a number that we can't even imagine with our tiny little brains. So imagine all the potential experiences that could be even in what we call our physical universe. And expand that out past our physical universe. I believe that our physical universe is actually kind of like a projection. And I believe that physical realities are like nested Russian dolls that lie within each other. So why we live in what we call the physical universe and we can experience it the way we do, it exists within consciousness. And within that consciousness, there exists many, many different physical universes, if you want to call it that, as well as non-physical universes, which we would call the heavenly realms, or heaven, or where we go when we die, the afterlife. So all these different things are nested within each other, creating what we call reality. So one thing that we can think about in terms of this, there's a couple different ways. And one is, let's think about what we know in terms of our own consciousness. Now, when we go to bed every night, most of us dream. And when we're in our dream, how do you experience that? I experience it as a physical reality. I experience in my dream the ability to drive a car, to walk up and down stairs, to swim, to eat, to do all the things I can do when I'm in my physical life. And in fact, when I'm in that dream, it doesn't even occur to me most of the time that it's a dream. It feels very physical to me. But when I wake up, I characterize it as non-physical because from the perspective of the consciousness I have right now when I'm awake, that only happened in my head. That didn't happen in, quote, reality, in the reality that I live in now. Now, again, going back to this nested reality thing I was talking about, what if when we wake up from this existence, when our body ceases to function, it's like waking up from a dream, which is what people that have had near-death experiences tell us. They tell us when they wake up, just like in The Wizard of Oz, like they're back at home in their own beds and their loved ones are all around them. And they go, wow, that was a really wild ride. That was a really interesting experience I had when I was on Earth. It seemed so real. So there are some indications even in our physical universe that what we live in is not a true reality. If we go down to a very small level, and say we go down to the level of a cell, and then down to the level of a molecule, and then down to the level of an atom. And at one time when I was in college, in an atom there was electrons, protons, and neutrons, and those were considered indivisible. But now we have quarks and neutrinos and all these subatomic particles. We've also found, since I was in college many, many years ago, that those things we called electrons that we thought of as little particles are not particles at all. They're actually quantum objects. They are partially a wave, they're partly a particle, they are fields of potentiality. So when we break down the matter that we live in to the most fundamental level, we find out that at the smallest level, it's not even real, it's not even solid. Everything appears solid to us, but it's not solid. Everything that you're sitting around you right now is made up mostly of space. It's mostly not occupied by anything. And again, on this very small level, they're just little bits of energy vibrating back and forth that create what we perceive as this physical reality. So while we're in this 3D world, we call anything that we can't perceive with our five senses from within this world non-physical. But physical, as I was trying to say earlier, is a matter of perspective. When we're in our dream, we consider that to be physical. When we're in this world, we consider this to be physical. Anything beyond this world, in terms of our perception of our five senses, we consider to be non physical. But is it really? What we live in is a uh, reality that's made by coalesced masses or coalesced energy that we perceive as physical. And I believe we live in a consensus reality that responds to the rules that we all believe in, or the rules that of this reality. But there doesn't have to be the same rules in all reality. So, for example, in this reality, we've got constants like the speed of light, the pull of gravity, etc., that make up the rules of this universe. But the rules in other universes could be very different, and we might perceive them as very different. We would perceive them as very different. This reality is very slow to react to thought. Now, there's some that believe that we can influence the material world with thought. I'm not saying whether we can or we can't, but if we can, it's a pretty slow, deliberate process. And we can, of course, influence physical reality by our actions. But in other realities, it's reported that they are much, much more thought responsive. That in those realities, we can, for example, imagine that we're on the beach and we're on the beach. We can imagine that we're with loved ones and we're with loved ones. We can think about actually even things that we've experienced in the past on earth, our past memories, and actually relive those memories. Some of these environments are very thought responsive. We consider those non-physical. We consider those not to be real. Now, in our world, again, and when dreams, we can have this ability, and we consider dreams to not be real. But in that reality, I think it could be that they are just less constrained, and people can actually do things that we can't do here. So there's no reason to believe that the world beyond the afterlife is more restrained than our world. And for it to be, quote, non-physical, where we were just orbs and beings of light, and we would meet a loved one and we'd say, oh man, I wish I could hug them, but I don't have my physical body, so I can't hug them anymore. Or we'd say, oh man, I really like to have a chocolate milkshake, but we don't have our tongues, so we can't have a chocolate milkshake. That doesn't seem right to me. That doesn't make sense to me that reality would be more constrained than this reality. Another example I give is I think about the Leslie Flint seances or Leslie Flint circles that they used to sit in decades ago. And Leslie Flint was a physical medium, and he sat in a circle, and they would bring spirits through. And inevitably, somebody in the circle would ask the spirits about their physical reality. And they'd ask them, can you do things there? Can you have a glass of scotch? Can you have a cigar? Do you have houses? And the people in the spirit world would almost laugh and saying, of course we can. Of course we can do anything that you can. In fact, we could do more than we could do things like we can fly. We can do crazy things like jump off of a mountain and not get hurt. So again, less constrained, not more constrained. I think about Suzanne Giesman. She talks about in a reading that she had, and a man came through, and one of the things he said was, I'm standing on two legs playing golf, which was interesting because when he was in this life, he had been missing a leg, and he loved to play golf, and so he was able to do that again in the world beyond. So when we think about heaven, I think a lot of times we get constrained, and we think about it as like, in the Bible, it's described as like a very, very large city. And we think of heaven as a homogeneous place. And again, which is it? Now, I'm not a big believer in levels in terms of like we go up and down. And if you get to be more advanced, you go to more advanced levels. But I am a big believer in very different environments. And I think mostly when we cross over, we go into realms that are more like our own, more like the astral realms, which are kind of like reflections of Earth, or Earth is a reflection of those, if you like. Realms that are very similar and be very familiar to what we're used to here. But I also believe that we can choose at other points in time to go to different types of realms. So is there a realm where people are just orbs of light? Possibly. Maybe that's what they want to experience. But I don't think that we have to go there. And I don't think that we go there and we miss being in a physical environment. If we want to be in a physical environment, I think we have the opportunity to come back to a physical environment. So those are my thoughts on what it's like to be in the afterlife. And those are some of the things that I base them on. Again, I always try to clear up as much fear as I can and as much confusion as I can. And I can understand why there would be something about this subject. Some people might say, I don't want to ever be in a physical body again after going through very difficult times here. Other people might say, I love the physical and I want to be in the physical. I want to have these experiences. And I think both of those can be accommodated in what we call the afterlife. So I want to close with Irene Weinberg, a friend of mine, wrote a book called They Serve Bagels in Heaven. And I thought that was so apt because her husband, Saul, came through and said they serve bagels in heaven. I think he was surprised because of this notion that heaven is this nebulous kind of place that's not really, it's kind of like shadowy and we don't have bodies and we can't have great experiences. In fact, I think it's just the opposite. So if you want to have cookies, if you want to have ice cream, if you want to learn to be able to play the guitar, which I'd like to be able to do someday, I think you'll be able to do all that and much more. So what are your thoughts?